Hi everybody, Catherine here again. And today I'm really excited and honored to share an example of a beautiful shadow work process that happened with one of my clients just yesterday. So with his permission, I'll share what happened during the session, and especially if you don't know what shadow work is or you just like more information about how the process can pan out, this video is really great for you. So my client, we'll just call him Will. It's not his real name, but he is a wonderful 18-year-old guy who's a college student. And I've been working with him for several sessions already, so I know about his family and his patterns. And so keep that in mind as I describe the session, as I do know this person and have worked with him before. And so Will is a very, very high achieving, big hearted guy. And he came to me in the session yesterday with the initial complaint being a relationship, or rather the end of a relationship. So in the process I'll describe today, we're going to be looking at shadow work through the window of relationships and also of judgments, because both of those are highly effective portals into the shadow. In other words, into that which we had to repress and forget and lose about ourselves in order to stay safe as children. So getting back to Will and his story, so he came to me very distraught because this relationship had just ended and it was his choice, but he was very frustrated because it was a pattern that had happened in other ways in his life. Red flag for the shadow coming through whenever there's a recurring pattern, right? So this relationship was a pattern of him going totally out of his way to help somebody and to give, and just feeling like he had so much to give from his heart and getting nothing in return, or actually quite rude behavior in return. And so immediately I just told him, well, you know that in shadow work, every single relationship we have is a reflection, a perfect mirror of how we treat ourselves. So we will attract the partner that mirrors the way that we treat ourselves. And so we did some exploration initially into how he might imagine that he treats himself that way. How does he take himself for granted? How does he kind of use and abuse himself? And we landed on the theme of abandonment, abandoning himself, because this gal who he was with would do things like slam the door in his face or ask for a lot of space. Even if they were sitting at a table together, she would ask to have a lot of space. And so Will just generally felt abandoned. And so I asked him, how might you be abandoning yourself? He couldn't really tell me. So this is when my intuitive powers kick in, and I'm just able to say, look, here's the way it is. Here's the way I see it. You're abandoning your emotions because you want to get on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing without being truly present with the fact that, ouch, this really sucks. This hurts. I'm grieving right now. Basically, this hurts was the main thing that he was abandoning himself about, because he had a pattern of distracting himself onto the next thing, the next accomplishment, the next thing to do, the next thing to fix. And so that was in our initial consultation. And so when so usually I consult with the client and then I ask them to lie down on the table if they're comfortable doing so, where they can just relax and go deeper into the work. So when we'll lie down on the table, and we did the initial grounding and relaxing meditation that I like to lead. I asked him, because this is a pretty effective portal, almost universally into shadow, I asked him to start to talk about a group of people who he really didn't respect, because I was trying to poke him to get some of this shadow out. So immediately he brought up people with anxiety. People who use, like in his school, for example, people who use the fact that they have anxiety to get away with things, as he put it, to not work as hard as other people would work. And so when I asked him, I said, okay, I want you to completely uncensored say whatever you want to say to the people with anxiety who are using that title to get away with things. And so he let loose, and what he landed on that really resonated was, the rest of us are working so hard while you are weak and lazy. And so right there, I knew exactly, I pinpointed what was in his shadow that we needed to bring out and give attention to that day, which was weakness. That because it's exactly the quality that we judge vehemently in other people that we are deeply afraid of in ourselves. So we dove into this feeling of weakness. So this is where shadow work can get really challenging, and where it's really not for the faint of heart, because what I will do is then I will ask somebody to really feel weakness, or whatever that feeling is that they are resisting in their body. I will ask them to feel that feeling to the fullest extent imaginable, possible for them in that moment. And I knew this was going to be possible for Will. And if it wasn't, I wouldn't have asked him to do it. So I asked him to pay attention to his heart. And sometimes to get a person accustomed to a certain vibration or an emotion, I'll ask a series of open-ended questions, not so that they'll answer them, but rather so the vibration of that question can settle and land with them. And that really can help in a very gentle way to entrain and adjust somebody's vibration, their being, to an emotion that's been so repressed for so long. So for example, I asked Will this series of questions that went something like this. What if I completely allowed myself to feel weak in this moment? I asked him, what if I have anxiety? What if I have pretty bad anxiety? And when I said that, his whole body started to shudder, like literally started to shudder. It was so difficult for him to internalize that vibration. And because the question is posed in an invitational way, it actually makes it easier for it to seep in. So it does have the effect often of bringing any resistance to the surface that the body and being has to that particular shadow element. So his body was literally going into convulsions when I said, what if you have pretty bad anxiety? What if you have anxiety? What if you are very weak? And so questions like that were asked. And then I had him again focus on his heart, and we did some deep breathing exercises after he'd finished, like letting those questions land into his vibration. And then I had him focus on his heart and really feel his heart. And I think I asked him further questions like, what if this heart was actually very, very tender, was very vulnerable and weak sometimes? And I'm trying to have some notes right here. Oh yes. So when I asked him to feel into his heart, he described it as feeling paralyzed. So I asked him to come up with adjectives or colors or images for his heart in that moment. And he did use the word paralyzed. My heart is paralyzed. And then I asked him, what is under the paralysis? And then I asked him again, what is under that? What is under that? Because in shadow work, we need to get to the bottom of the barrel. We need to get as deep as we possibly can into that repression, because that's where the emotional surgery happens, where we get to the root of it and where suddenly things can change, and they often do. So what happened with Will is that when I led him down the path, what is underneath the paralysis in your heart? What is under that? Then he had this amazing experience that suddenly, and he's very visual and imaginative, so he said, wow, when I got to that very bottom of it, these green threads of light started to work through my heart. I saw them swooping down, and keep in mind, this is a totally mainstream kind of guy. But he saw this, right? Which is the healing coming into his heart, because the truth is that, as the Rumi quote says, the bandaged place is where the light enters us. And when we allow ourselves to release resistance to feeling a certain emotion, suddenly it changes. So I've had clients experience spontaneous light coming into a wounded place. That's very common. Or like for Will, it was these green threads of healing light that came into his heart. And then after the session, well, after we filled in, because I like to fill in somebody's energy with love, with divine love, with their own love after every session, especially when we've dived very deep. And afterwards, Will was, he was like a different person. He was relaxed, whereas before he might have been actually diagnosable with high functioning anxiety himself. That's the irony that shadow is, right? We judge what we are. But he was like a totally different person. He was relaxed and calm, and he kept putting his hand in his heart and just saying, wow, I've never felt this before. And he was able to connect to the tenderness in his heart, which meant that his shadow was integrated in that way, which meant that he didn't have to be judgmental anymore, and he didn't lash out at those people anymore. And more importantly, he didn't lash out at himself anymore. It was like he was able to hold himself, to take care of himself. So this is a really beautiful example of how shadow work, as challenging in the moment as it can be, is truly the greatest form of self-love and self-commitment. Because as Will's experience illustrates, it's like he returned home to himself. And that's really what I get to see each and every day in my work. So I hope this has been useful for you, and have a beautiful day.